You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're looking at life beyond cardiac arrest. So 3 powerful stories really that show us that it really does take a system to save a life. We hear from Paul Swindell, Zoe Hitchcock and Noah Cohen. 3 people, 3 cardiac arrests, and 3 lives changed in an instant. So 2 of these stories, and indeed patients I was involved with, but it really does show you the power of the chain of survival. But also, something really important from these stories is what happens after the resuscitation ends. So once the monitors are disconnected and start that process of rebuilding their life. So there is a really wide variety of stories to be told in this episode. One from Zoe collapsing on Oxford Street in cardiac arrest, to Noah collapsing during a sports session at school and having a cardiac arrhythmia, to Paul Swindell, who collapsed at his desk whilst at work. But it really does take us beyond the physiology and the pre-hospital response to really explore the realities that follow that recovery, the identity, the fear, the family, and often the unseen emotional and psychological burden carried by survivors. It also really denotes the rehabilitation and the pain, the chest pain post CPR, but also that post cardiac arrest apnesia, getting others around them to really piece the puzzle together, meeting clinicians and the importance of meeting pre-hospital clinicians to really piece things together and piece their lives back together so they can get an accurate picture of what did happen. So these stories really do reunite us with why we joined the job in the first place. I do hope you enjoy them and indeed get some value from them as it reminds us why we show up to work every day. Okay, please do enjoy.
I was working from home that day before it was quite trendy to work from home. As you say, it was 2014. I was actually a freelance software developer at the time, and I just finished working with a bank in London for 2 years, and that had been a work hard, play hard scenario, and I really enjoyed that actually. And it was just coming up to Easter, so I was taking a bit of time off over Easter with the kids and looked for a new role. And my wife was working as a fitness instructor at the time. And the day before my cardiac arrest happened to be my 48th birthday. So we went out and did various things on my birthday with a meal for my parents, and went out to see Frank Skinner comedy show. And apparently I had a great day and really enjoyed that. And then the next day I went to the gym first thing, as I'd done quite often, being someone who considered themselves reasonably fit and healthy, and having a fitness instructor as a wife, the motivation is there to keep yourself in trim and up to speed for the kids as well. But she was due out at a meeting to arrange some fitness classes, and this, I guess, was about 11 o'clock in the morning. And then she, fortunately for me, came home because the meeting had got cancelled at short notice. And then she proceeded to continue on downstairs, packing some bags for my son who was going away on a cub camp. I was upstairs doing some work, preparing for an interview that I was arranging for the following couple of weeks. And the last thing I know that I did in what I call my previous life was I sent an email at 12:04, and then sometime in the next 25 minutes I had a cardiac arrest. And I know it's 25 minutes because at 12:29 my wife came across me doing a good impression of a doorstop and phoned 999. Now, she didn't hear me collapse or anything. I was upstairs, as I said, in my home office. She was downstairs doing some other stuff, and she just came up to ask me a question. And then she found me there going rather pallid colour and started CPR and called 999. Remarkably, our home phone, which was notorious for losing its charge and being lost down the back of the sofa was actually on my desk and had a charge. So she managed to call, but it did cut off. Um, Fortunately for me, there was an ambulance not too far away on its way to another call, but it got redirected to me. So it was with me very rapidly. But that was, we don't know. Mine was an unwitnessed arrest. We don't know how long I was down for before my wife found me, but she started CPR. The ambulance arrived pretty quickly. I think there was a CFR as well turned up, and then another paramedic crew. And then I think about 20 minutes later, there was air ambulance, Essex Air Ambulance. They, to the annoyance of the local golfers, parked on the golf course and scrambled through the hedges and climbed over fences and quite heroic acts and got to me. I was resuscitated, I believe, in well, just where I am now, and then I think I was seen to be a bit agitated. I'm sure you've seen that before, and a little bit, I don't know, violent perhaps. And so they moved me to the front garden and put me into an induced coma, much to the annoyance of the builders next door who had to be quiet apparently. And then I was taken to the hospital by ambulance, the Essex Cardiothoracic Centre, which for me was quite close, only about 10 or 15 minutes away, and is one of the sort of leading cardiac centres, I guess, in the south, and was at that time, I think it had only been open 5 years, so it was a fairly new facility. But I mean, I'm telling you all that, but I don't actually remember it. That's all pieced together from inquiring with my wife, the paramedics, doctors, and people, because I've established a bit of a relationship with the Essex Cardiothoracic Centre and Essex Air Ambulance, and quite a few people in the field now. Yeah, and that perhaps it can be a subject that we come back to about establishing those relationships, because one of the things that was very beneficial for me was, as I was trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together to find out what actually happened to me, because I got no recollection of it, or the days or even weeks leading up to it, or the time in the hospital. There's little vignettes, but I still don't know whether they're sort of memories that have been placed by looking at pictures or from what I've spoken with other people. So I can't tell if they're true memories or not. But my memory is very vague at that time. But to say one of the things I did do later in that year, this was April, so I think it was October or November, I got to meet the paramedics and the air ambulance and all a great bunch of people at the Essex Air Ambulance base, and that was very therapeutic for me and brought a bit of closure in my story for me. Well, going with the physical ones, the immediate problems I had, you touched on there, were the chest pain, which I sort of complained a lot to my wife about, and she had no sympathy with me. It saved my life. So, I mean, I totally agree with you. A lot of patients do complain about it, and I think one of the issues that patient, or what I can do and what other people in SCA UK can do, is explain to others that you should experience that is quite normal, and it's not to worry that it's something else going on with your heart. Another physical aspect of my immediate recovery was the fatigue, and that is something that I think that's probably the number one physical issue that survivors have, is that the impact on the body as a whole, not just physically being tired, but mentally being tired as well. I think the first time I realized that this was going to be a bit of a struggle when I left the hospital was just walking to the car park, and it, probably was no more than 50, 60 meters, but it took a long time and I was exhausted by just getting there. And then when I was home, there used to be a shop at the end of the road where I could get a paper, and I could walk to there without having to stop on the way. And that, being someone who was previously fit and healthy, that really hit home basically, and it was quite concerning at the time because I felt like I'd like become an old person overnight almost, and my the sort of physical cognitive limitations that I had at the time. I was very slow of thought. My speech was impaired. I have what I call a missing word syndrome. I couldn't string sentences together without having trouble recalling what something was called or what I was saying, and I would have to speak in short sentences, otherwise I'd lose the train of thought, which again was very annoying because previously, as I mentioned, I was a software developer, and I'll need to be able to think in abstract thoughts and bring those ideas together so I could explain them to someone else or have coding ideas and things like that. And I just found that I couldn't do that anymore. And as I mentioned, I was one of the last things I did was send an email about an interview that I was due to have. And I had that interview, but it was about 6 or 8 weeks later. And I was a little concerned about it, being asked these questions about coding and software. And I thought I know what the sort of questions I'm going to get asked are. So I wrote loads of post-it notes with what I thought the answers were going to be and splattered them all over the doors and walls in my room. And then to my horror, they didn't ask me any of these questions. It was more of a dialogue scenario interview because it was over the internet. And it was completely fell flat on my face. And I thought, I'm never going to be able to do this again, or it's going to be hard to do this again. So they were some of the challenges, and I also had a physical challenge in that I had a scar on my eye, and I never actually knew why I had this scar on my eye, and it was only sort of about 18 months later where I saw an optician, and he talked about the fact that I had a scar on the back of my eye as well as on the eyelid, and I must have fallen on something into my eye. So I was extremely lucky that I wasn't physically blinded as well. Um, but going on from the physical issues, which additionally I experienced headaches, and I had basically a permanent headache for years, which only dissipated when I was in a didn't do anything basically. If I tried to talk with people or engage in conversations or went to environments when there was overstimulation for me, I'd have to go and lay down because my headache would be just so bad I couldn't do anything. So it was quite a challenge physically, and psychologically. Um, I think the main thing was that I was previously fit and healthy and led an active life with 2 kids, did things at the weekend, had I wouldn't say strenuous job, but a demanding job, as I mentioned, but coped with all of that and then went to being kind of like, as I said, an old man and not being able to think straight or do what I was doing before, physically or mentally. And I guess that, gets you down a bit. I would never say I was depressed, but part of it was not knowing what to expect and what I was supposed to be expecting, as it were, because at that time I went looking for answers to my why it happened. I was actually diagnosed as idiopathic. I left the hospital with an ICD, implantable cardioverter defibrillator, because they didn't know why it happened. I didn't have any medications. I wasn't prescribed any rehab because I didn't qualify for that. There was nothing wrong with my heart, as they said. So it was a case of having a fun, happy life, and then overnight waking up in hospital thinking, "What the hell just happened?" sort of thing. Well, I didn't think that initially. It was probably only when I left hospital I thought that, "What the hell's just happened?" And you're in hospital with nurses 20 and doctors 24/7 looking after you, machines monitoring everything, what's going on. I had many tests while I was there and they found nothing. And then you're discharged. And I was basically told, well, just get back on with your life now without any real help or pathway as to where I should be going to get my recovery on track and rehabilitation. And it was all basically down to myself and my wife and my family to help me, because I've been given a number for an arrhythmia nurse because I had VF. Um, but I never thought there was any actual problem with my heart. They told me in the hospital, your heart's fine, and I always felt it was. And I'm previously fit and healthy, as I said. So I never actually called the arrhythmia nurse. I only felt it was something else, and I felt there was something wrong with my brain, if you like. I had an inkling that I wasn't functioning right, but whenever you go and look for cardiac arrest, you would come up with medical sites and they'll be far too in depth medically for me. So, that's where perhaps I started to feel a little bit alone or abandoned by the healthcare system, to tell the truth, because I've gone through this life-changing event and then it was just, okay, you can go and get on with it yourself.
And I went to Oxford Street, and I was probably a little bit rushed for time because I was trying to get back for an evening commitment. And I didn't tell anyone I was going there. I'd gone there to buy Phil the Jordans he'd wanted since he was 13 for his birthday. And so nobody knew I was there. And I'm not sure if I do remember, or I've tried to remember kind of that last journey from walking from Oxford Circus, like up Oxford Street. I've done it a number of times since, but there's a part of me that kind of like feels that maybe I felt like I needed to sit down, and I was maybe like looking for like one of the seats along there, but I just don't know how accurate that is. And I feel like I don't remember anything else about what happened, probably because my brain has tried to protect me from any of the horror of what unfolded, or because literally I went into shutdown and I don't remember it for that reason.
And I don't think it's too uncommon actually to have this sort of cardiac arrest amnesia, and to have post-event amnesia actually, and just to really not have a real clear timeline or sequence of events after interviewing a number of cardiac arrest survivors. I think this seems to be sort of a commonality really. Could you sort of speak to, because and it was such a seminal event, Zoe, and just I think put a lot of things in perspective for you that you spoke about quite candidly on the last episode. Could you maybe just speak to sort of the critical chain of survival that was in place for you at the time? Because we spoke about the police, and then obviously we turned up, and then HEMS, the helicopter emergency medical service, turned up. Could you sort of maybe speak to that sequence of chain of survival from your perspective?
Yeah, so I was so incredibly lucky that I got help and attention straight away. And actually, as you know, before the two police officers came to help me, I'd had CPR by then from at least 3 other members of the public. And one of the police officers that gave me CPR, his CPR training was second to none. He'd been in the army, his stamina was everything that I needed, and he really did like fight and give it his all to try and get me back and keep me alive. The fact that you were able to come to me on a bicycle and race there, London's so busy with traffic, and you were able to bypass all of that. I know you said like buses and stuff were like stopping and literally flagging you down and saying like she's over there, because like people very they realized the seriousness of what was happening, and that you weren't, and that defib was needed. If I had perhaps taken the train straight home on that day and fallen into cardiac arrest on the train, or if I'd have been local to where I live in Hertfordshire, I would not have got the same response. I could have, it's not like massively rural where I live, but it's much quieter than London, and I could have collapsed in the street and wouldn't have got CPR straight away. There wouldn't be a paramedic able to come to me on a bike. There probably wouldn't be an ambulance that could have got to me so quickly. There aren't enough ambulances as it is. And I certainly wouldn't have got probably a HEMS team coming. And really, that's something that the whole sequence of events, but I really do believe that because I was able to have the cooling agent treatment that only a doctor could give at the roadside, I really do feel that that's been critical to the way I've been able to recover and fully recover. Because I would say that because of the way I've been able to like go on and live my life since, I feel fully recovered. I've not sustained any heart damage, any brain injury. I am as I was before, apart from now I've got this like little guardian angel ICD. So incredibly lucky to have been where I was, and for the sequence of events to have unfolded in the way that they did. I've said it before, but the stars definitely aligned for me that day. Yeah, so I had 3 days thereabouts in an induced coma, and when I was brought round, my family, I won't go into this too much, but they were told that there could be a risk of brain damage. And when I first did come round, I wasn't able to shape my mouth to make words. So basically it was just like noise that was coming out, and I was very agitated because I'd been brought around quite quickly. I was waving my arms around, and my family were thinking, oh my goodness, she's like brain damaged. It was just like the worst feeling for them in those moments. They were so thankful that I'd survived, but were then thinking, oh God, like what life will be ahead of her. But actually very quickly, within a few hours, I was able to communicate through like signaling with my eyes, blinking, which for them kind of told them that I was in there. And as the hours passed and through some sleep, eventually woke and then was able to talk. My mum did not leave my bedside the whole time I was in hospital. I was there for 2 weeks. She was, as you know, there the whole time. And that was, I mean, just I look back and think like, God, it must have just been so awful for her in dealing with what she was kind of like witnessing and seeing, and then me coming around from the coma and seeming like I was brain damaged. It just must have been like the absolute worst. But she didn't leave my side, and the one time she did was during the night when I woke up, and I said to the doctor, like, where am I? And he said, oh, don't worry, you've had a cardiac arrest, but you're in hospital. And I don't remember this. Again, it's like the post-traumatic amnesia. And then my mum came back, and she was explaining to me what had happened. I went to sleep, I wake up again, and I was like, where am I? And it like kept happening like that. And I know, bless you, that you came to meet me at the hospital. And that was really important, actually, to my family, because it was such a wonderful opportunity to be able to thank you. We got to meet that first time, but also the team there, they were able to understand a bit more about what had happened to better help the care and treatment going, and tests and stuff going forward. But I don't remember our first meeting, and again, I think it's that like post-traumatic amnesia. So when I look back, it sounds kind of a bit messed up to say, because obviously it was a very traumatic experience for my family, but for me, when I woke up, all of that trauma was over, and I just had this loving family around me and the most incredible support. And I look back on it with really fond memories. I just feel so lucky that I got the treatment and the care that I did. The staff in the hospital, like every single one of them that I came into contact, from the lunch lady to the cardiologist consultant in charge, like every single person played a part in that kind of recovery journey. And really thankful.
So Zoe, how has life been since the since the implanted defibrillator or the ICD, how has it sort of changed the way that you exercise, or indeed the way you approach physical activity? How has sort of the transition been?
So when I first came out of hospital, I did struggle with my fitness. I couldn't walk a few steps before I felt exhausted. And I think I might have said this in the last podcast, but like Phil was great in kind of like helping to train me back to some kind of fitness. And we'd just go out like every day and he'd walk me a little bit further down the road until I could walk around the whole block. I did some physio locally and some cardiac rehab physio, and it wasn't up to it. I hate to like sit and be negative about any aspect of the NHS, but it was unfortunately really quite poor. They weren't prepared to deal with, they were used to dealing with much older patients, and they weren't geared up to deal with somebody like me who, one, had a cardiac arrest, not a heart attack, but two, who had a real like zest for life and really wanted to get back to some kind of fitness. I'd sustained some rib damage as part of the CPR, and that was quite aggravating and causing me a lot of shoulder pain, and I'd lost a lot of like flexion and movement. I couldn't basically like lift my arm up properly, and so I needed like proper rehab for that. My London cardiologist was incredible, Dr. Varnava at Hammersmith, and she sent me to Charing Cross to have some rehabilitation there. And the guy in charge there, Nigel, he and the team were absolutely outstanding. And it was everything that I needed it to be, and gave me the most amount of confidence. And actually, when I finished the program there, I can't remember how long it was. It might have been like 6 weeks, a couple of months. And when I finished the program there, I was kind of like doing interval training, like down at the local lakes here. And I say the lakes and it makes it sound flat, but actually there's like a slight hilly area, and like I'd be there with Phil like first thing in the morning, like running up and down the lakes and thinking like, wow, I can't believe like I can do this. Because in that early recovery, I didn't imagine that I'd ever get to the point where I was either physically fit enough or confident enough to do it. But wearing a heart monitor and just listening to the way my body felt, and also going by my experience at that Charing Cross rehabilitation, it just basically made me feel really empowered to take control of my own fitness again, and just to be fit. But I've learned I really hate running. For years, like before the cardiac arrest and even after it, like I'd be like, oh, running's a really good thing to do to keep fit. I really don't enjoy it. So nowadays, actually, I don't bother. I love dancing, and I could do a night at Ministry of Sound and like dance all night and still be tired the next day, like any other like person would be. But yeah, the ICD has given me confidence to live my life, and I think because I know it's there as a backup, and it has been used as a backup since the cardiac arrest. I feel safe to exercise and to carry on living normally.
I'd always grown up, and I'd always had some sense in certain moments when I was either doing very intense exercise or in a intense situation, for example, I'd feel my heart on those rare occasions, and I still do. And that was all I knew. So I didn't know to think anything of it. But leading up to that cardiac arrest, I was doing PGCSE, where we had to do a Cooper test, long endurance running. And I was training, I was running twice a week around the block after school. And then I did go with my friend Tao once to, I think it was Primrose Hill. And in one of those sessions, this might have been 2 weeks before my cardiac arrest, I remember having to stop after about 15 minutes. I felt my heart, and it actually kind of felt something I hadn't felt before. And in that moment, it just all seemed very surreal to me, and I didn't think much of it. But looking back, that was obviously a little bit of a signifier there. Just because I was pushing myself to the absolute max. I've got a sort of drive where I wanted to, you know, I'm not the most naturally fit or athletic person, but I wanted to, you know, do well in my fitness and do well in my exams, obviously. So I was pushing myself, and I think I pushed myself a little bit too far there.
Noah said goodbye in the morning as usual, went to school. I went to visit my dad in hospital around, now I can't exactly remember the time that we had, but I got, on the way back, which was around midday or something, I got a call. That
it would have been around like 12 o'clock, because that's what I had.
Around midday. I got a call from the school, or from my wife, I think she'd been called, that Noah had collapsed at school. And it was pretty weird. So they couldn't really tell me much more information about actually whether he was alive.
They probably didn't know.
It was like probably one of the most terrifying moments in my life. So I rushed to get my wife and get to the car. Luckily, it wasn't too far away. I mean, we were about 25 minutes drive away from the school. So we got in the car and we tried to ring the school. We got through to the school. They couldn't really tell me any information. I think they were, I'm not sure what was going on exactly, but they couldn't tell. I did say, is he breathing? And they couldn't tell me. And so we were driving, you know, to get to school, which took 25 minutes, I think.
Was it you and Mum both in the car?
Yeah. So I'd literally come back from the hospital and it was in the car. And when we got to the school, well, it was pretty terrifying, to be honest. I mean, the amazing thing that happened in terms of his survival and everything is that he was at school doing sport, and he was
couldn't have been a better place to happen, really.
Luckily, there was an incredible sports teacher, you know, Ashley White, who was the guy who really saved his life initially, and then all you guys carried that on. But when I got there, Noah was on the what is that place called? No, where you were training, the
Astro pitch.
The Astro, they got an Astro pitch there. He was lying. He was fitting, I think is the word, which I've never seen anyone do. So that was pretty traumatic to see. So I didn't really. I think you guys were all busy there, you know. So working on him at that point. I can't remember if the helicopter had come in. I think that came in soon after I arrived, or I can't. You know, it's hard. I can't remember exactly the stage of everything, but all I know is, yeah, it was a different, you know, the most difficult day of my life, but we had a kind of miraculous result at the end. I can talk more about it if you want, but but that's the initial thing, you know, coming up to where so it was a complete shock, really, what was going on.
From your perspective, what can you remember prior to the event? So if you just want to see you're running the Cooper test, did you start to get some symptoms? Did you start to feel dizzy? How did it look from your side, Noah?
So as a matter of fact, I don't remember a single thing from that day, which is probably, I assume, not too uncommon. Prior to it happening, it was a regular random Friday 6 years ago in my life. Unlike obviously my dad, I wasn't aware of anything once it started happening, and I don't remember a thing. The last thing I remember prior to it happening was my mum's birthday, which was 2 days before. We went out to some Italian restaurant, I think, and that's probably my last memory prior to the event. And then, that's basically it for me.
What I know is that what we were told later is that he was doing the Cooper test, and then he completed it and sat down with one of his friends. I think a friend called Ollie.
Yeah. No, I've been told the whole story. Just from my perspective, I don't remember a thing. But I pretty much know the whole picture. You know, I've had a load of my good friends were there, and obviously Ashley, who helped save my life along with you guys, has told me stuff, and I basically have the whole picture of what happened. And, it was, it's weird to think about, arguably the most significant thing to happen to me in my life so far in terms of impactful and life-changing happened, and I wasn't even conscious, which is a quite odd thing.
So I don't think it's uncommon to have this, what they call this sort of post-cardiac arrest amnesia, where you can't recall anything. And every sort of cardiac arrest survivor I speak to has the same. There's a complete memory loss of the event. And if I'm right in thinking from your history and from the history, Ashley, Mr. White was speaking about, I think you sat down post Cooper test because you were so acutely tired at that time. And then never really got back up from that event, which
I think I in fact lay down with my friend Oliver, Ollie, and we both lay down. We were knackered after the 12 minutes, and my teacher, Miss Hoskins, told us to get up. Ollie got up, and I never got up.
Yeah. So interestingly, from my perspective, Noah, when I arrived, the other paramedics were certainly there. The fantastic work that Ashley White, your teacher, did was proof of the start of the chain. As Erin was saying, and yourself, it was fortunate that this event happened at school, so that there was witnesses, so that that Mr. White could jump into action and start to perform bystander CPR once he recognised you were in cardiac arrest. Certainly, when I got to you as well, there was still cardiac arrest ongoing. I think you were actually in cardiac arrest for about half an hour. Your heart was quite stubborn at that time, and there was a number of, we had to shock your heart a number of times. We had to do afterwards really was just sedate you as well, because there was a little bit of post-cardiac arrest agitation, which is not uncommon again. And so just to try and control your as Erin was saying, your any seizure activity, any agitation, any sort of involuntary movements. And then Erin's quite right. We called for the helicopter because what we wanted to do is give you a roadside anesthetic. So put a breathing tube down your neck. So just to help you breathe, just to deeply sedate you and just to get you to the right place. So the HEMS team arrived. I think we promptly got on with giving you an anesthetic and sedating you, but all of which you wouldn't have really been aware of because you were sort of deeply unconscious yourself.
Of course.
Yeah, and at the same time, then I peeled away. I remember very much speaking to Erin, understandably extremely concerned, but then just briefing Erin on the updates and indeed on the successes. So the fact we had your heart beating again, the fact you were making these involuntary movements, which was a great sign to see so early on.
When was that? Was that on the day?
That was on the day. So Erin was with you. He was with me. He was in the back of the ambulance, and so we were sort of briefing him as well as he was looking in on the care, which was I think the best place to be, because then Erin could be directly involved in your care as you moved to hospital. So I believe the HEMS team took you away.
So I just wanted to say one thing, which was before we get on to that next bit, which is as I said, I was driving to school, so I probably took 25 minutes, half an hour to get there. So you were there. But, Ashley White, I think, had to do CPR for an incredibly long time.
He told me 15 minutes.
I think he was the only guy who knew how to do it properly. And in fact, he was the sports teacher. Luckily, he was incredibly fit, and he did a great job, obviously. But there was no defibrillator in the school or anything like that, so he was on his own for I think it was 17 minutes before the ambulance arrived. I'm not sure who was there first. I think it was a policewoman arrived first, apparently, in that initial period. I mean, do you know how long? I mean, when you were there, how long was that after the call? I'm just interested to know, because I was told it was about 17 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, it was quite a while actually for myself, because I remember being in South London at the time, so it was a good duration afterwards for myself as a critical care paramedic to arrive, and I remember very much being there after the ambulance, after the first responder, very much.
Yeah.
So I think
were you the guy who called in the helicopter? That was your decision once you saw that he was getting through the initial bit, probably.
Yeah, it was the decision. It was the decision on scene, but by a few of us actually, that it was the best course of action actually to get the helicopter team in to both sedate him and indeed put a breathing tube down his throat. And what that did is it allowed us to directly transfer you through to Great Ormond Street, but it also allowed the continuation of care, so continuity of care once you were deeply sedated and anaesthetized with the roadside anaesthetic. So it really did help with the transferal and indeed the continuity as we went forwards. So let's just play that out then. So actually you're in Great Ormond Street. They assess you, Noah. In that interim, Noah, what procedures had you done? I think you had a couple of significant surgeries quite early on in your treatment.
Yeah, it was it all happened quite fast from my point of view. Obviously, I was in hospital initially for a couple of weeks, maybe 3, 4, I can't quite remember. But had 2 quite big operations, a month and then another month later. I had an open heart surgery to replace my aortic valve, and then I also had the internal defibrillator put in, which I just got replaced last week, in fact. So that was quite a process. And from my point of view, the hospital experience wasn't the worst time in my life, because I was kind of, I was on the road to recovery. I had quite a lot of anesthetics and drugs I think I was taking at the time. So I wasn't hurting at all. I was watching movies, and it was quite a soft and slow recovery from my point of view. And I had my family obviously there most of the time, and my friends came to visit, and that basically got me through the hospital.
Okay, that's it for this week. Next week, we're going to be back on Monday with neurodivergence and how to identify it, but also how to treat patients with compassion and use de-escalation techniques to really get the best out of a patient consultation with someone with neurodivergence. Okay, speak to you soon.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.